Okay, good morning, everyone. Nice to see all of you. Welcome to our third meeting of the Richard L. Thompson Lecture Series. If you haven't been here for our previous recordings, we're going through Richard L. Thompson's or Sariputa's books, and we're covering them chapter by chapter. We have a guest each meeting presenting a short lecture and summarizing the contents. So 2 weeks ago, we had Murli Gopal, and he presented the first chapter, Astronomical Siddhantas. And today we're presenting chapter 2, Vedic Physics, the Nature of Space, Time, and Matter. And today we're grateful for Narasimhadeva for joining us and presenting on this chapter. He's an electrical engineer and has served on the TOVP team from 2008 to 2010, and he currently works in the automotive industry. So thank you, Narasimhadeva, for being here with us. If you can
Krishna.
share a screen if you need to, and you can go ahead and start.
Thank you. Hi, Krishna, everyone. Okay, there it is. I hope everyone can see my screen.
We can see it. Thank you.
Okay. Hi, Krishna. Welcome to the Vedic Cosmology and Astronomy discussion based on book by His Grace Vedaputta Prabhu. And I will be going through the chapter 2, highlighting the salient points that he has brought up, and we can discuss at the end of the meeting. So without much ado, we can get started. Okay, so the topic is, the chapter topic is Vedic Physics, the nature of space, time, and matter. So, so here, the Prabhu is trying to bring in the concept of the Vedic science or physics, to be specific, since the book is about cosmology and astronomy. So he is trying to bring in the concept of Vedic physics, wherein there are many different aspects of Vedic physics which is not explainable or can be possibly given a proper explanation based on the current understanding of science and physics. So that's why he's calling it as a Vedic physics. And he's making the reader comfortable to the topic on how to bridge the gap between the current science and the Vedic physics. And so let's go on the topic. So here I start with the current approach of the science, so which is largely an reductionistic approach, wherein all the different things that's being encountered, all the phenomena that's being observed through senses or extended senses with instruments, it's all theorized, and it is hypothesized with large explanation, with attempts to explain it with the current understanding of what has the science accumulated over the millennium in terms of understanding, in terms of the different known physical laws, like the four known forces, the electrical, the nuclear, and the gravitational, and subatomic. So all these different understandings that the science has built up over the years, over the decades, especially making great progress in the 20th century. And a lot of Nobel laureates have come up, and then they have made a lot of different theories, and also had some backing in terms of observations, and also trying to connect them with the proper explanation in terms of hypothesis, and which is largely kind of accepted as a de facto view of world. So, but here, there is the approach in the modern science is that that everything that is observed can be explained, possibly, even if it is not explained, it's not explainable today, in near future, because the premise is that everything that we see, we observe, is explainable and digestible in the human brain. So with that approach, so there is a reductionistic approach. So everything that is newly being observed is being linked to something that is already known. And this approach has some limitations, especially when it comes to a lot of things that are too far beyond, like the universe and so on and so forth, or things that is too small for us, like the subatomic world. So that is something that science has always had trouble giving a proper explanation to different things. Whereas in the world of reality that we see, and then we can largely explain through Newton laws and gravitational laws and so on and so forth. And whereas subatomic and in the universal observations, it's largely it's limited to theory. So that being the approach, there are a lot of issues with that approach. So this book, this chapter does not go into all those limitations. This chapter is largely introduction to Vedic physics and how the science can possibly accommodate it in terms of the current physical physics and give it a chance to stand its own ground and give it a worthy consideration. So that is the plea that Richard Thompson is placing in front of us today. So the so if you won't be going into the limitations of modern science to a large extent, just a highlight of the major ideas, and but rather we would focus on the Vedic physics itself, the how space, time, and matter is understood in terms of Vedic physics. So, so he said here is a player from Thompson. So he's saying that our physical world is there, but can we extend the physics or the current understanding of science in order to accommodate Vedic physics? So ardent, so Vedic world view as in Srimad Bhagavatam. So when you say Srimad Bhagavatam is primarily a book on Vedic view of life and reality, and it is not necessarily as an intends to explain or bridge the gap between the scientific understanding of modern humans to that of the science as it was understood by the Vedic theologians. So that is not the attempt, although there is some glimpse into the Vedic physics, and there is a lot of explanations here and there spread all over Srimad Bhagavatam, but it is not trying to address the science or scientists um, um, science or scientists how they can bridge the gap between the current modern physics as well as to the Vedic physics. So that is not the attempt, because the attempt is to give things that is more important for life and reality, how humans can make sense of it, and how humans can price themselves about the the life and reality based upon senses and the body, and come to the platform of spirit. So that is the attempt of Srimad Bhagavatam, and it goes into it explains different things in terms of different stories. Although the modern they call it as mythology, but it is in Vedic viewpoint, it is the historical narration of different happenings. All right, so let's continue from where we left. So we were talking about how Srimad Bhagavatam is not intended to be a scientific encyclopedia, and it's not going to be an spokesperson for the Vedic physics. So it's going to the intention is to give different um, talk about the life of different great devotees of the Lord who have done some uncommon things in order to establish or in order to connect back to the Supreme Lord and glorify His greatness. So that is the purpose of Srimad Bhagavatam. Although there are different scientific information spread out all over Srimad Bhagavatam, and it does not attempt to kind of verify it, or does not give you a way to kind of verify it, or how to explain it in terms of modern science. So that is definitely not the attempt. So that is, and for an example is given here in the second chapter of Sadapata Prabhu. So he mentions how the subtle elements they interact with different other elements, ethereal elements. So the third canto, there is a description of subtle elements of the body. So there are five major elements called Panchabhuta: earth, air, fire, water, and ether. And there are three subtle elements which constitutes or which makes up almost all of this material creation. And so the subtle elements itself, the mind, the intelligence, and the consciousness or the ego, is not necessarily made up of the other five elements. It is something that is subtle, but it is not spiritual yet. So it is in between the gross elements and the spirit soul, Chinmaya, which is which makes up the entire spiritual world. And so that's kind of a connection between the gross and the spiritual element or spiriton. So the subtle element is a subject of great study, and it concerns to some extent with the brain and nervous system as we understand today, because brain and nervous system is known that is the storehouse of consciousness, storehouse of how the impulses are communicated from all over the body to the brain. So that is definitely an connecting link between the mind and the world around us. So there is some detail on that in the third canto, wherein sage Kapila is explaining to Mother Devahuti on the concept of mind. So it goes to some good extent, gives you different glimpses of how the mind functions, and what it is not and what it is, how it is different from the intelligence, and how it's different from the conscious self. So there is some amount of detail. But would it translate exactly? Even the nomenclature would not really match with the modern science. So mind as it is understood by a modern scientist is different from the mind that is explained in Srimad Bhagavatam. And same goes with the intelligence, same goes with consciousness. And so that is the subject that Sadhguru Prabhu would deal in the later chapters. Next thing that he gave an example about is the luminiferous ether. So that's a name that is coined for what we all know as Brahma Jyoti. So Brahma Jyoti is the illumination that is coming from the body of Krishna. He illuminates the entire spiritual world, and that Brahma Jyoti, the translating from Sanskrit to English would be the light emanating from the spirit. So that is also a great subject matter of research, and it cannot be fully understood in terms of modern science. And then he also talks about different other things that are hinted in the Puranas and where a lot of different topics talked about. Like in this case, it's how a bell metal can be made into gold by an alchemical process. So that's an interesting topic to research for everybody, because gold is something that's very valuable. And if somebody can find out a way to transform a bell metal to gold, yes, that's definitely a great invention. And so with that, hints are given in the different parts of the Puranas and Itihasas, but the exact details are not presented. So that's not the intention of the. And also, we see some of the concepts similar to that in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which would be laughed off as in mythology in the current scientific understanding. So let's go to the next slide. So here, Siddhartha was making an argument how Lord Krishna is very special and how he is the origin of both material and spiritual world. So we cannot separate anything away from Krishna. So Krishna is always there and not there at the same time, at all times. So he is so in the past, present, as well as in future. So he is an inherent concept to be understood if we were to take a deep study of Vedic physics or Vedic science. So Krishna is something who is there at different levels or different in different ways. As Paramatma, he is permeating the entire creation in every atom, as well as he is there as the summon substance of the Virata Roop, which is the body of where the whole universe is existing. So from the smallest to the biggest, he is the backbone of everything. So one cannot separate the science from the supreme. That is also his argument. And he also goes on to say that science is locked in three-dimensional thought. And three dimension is what we can perceive. So X, Y, and Z, the Cartesian coordinates. That is how the world is perceived or explained to us in the modern science. But the Vedic thought is definitely an multi-dimensional world. If you go from Srimad Bhagavatam perspective, a lot of different ancient happenings that is explained in Srimad Bhagavatam, which goes on to a great extent explain different ways how this is a much more complex world than what we perceive. So that is something that comes again and again. We'll see a lot of examples of that in the last three slides, and we'll keep moving at the moment. So some examples that Siddhartha Prabhu also deals with is in order to hint at the multidimensional parallel words is how Lord Krishna summons Lord Brahma. So Lord Brahma of this world, Brahmanda, who has four heads, and so he has four heads, and he comes to see Lord Krishna to talk about something very important. First time, of course, he had trouble with Lord Krishna. He took away some of his friends and his calves, and he had to cut a sorry figure and say sorry to Lord Krishna. And next time he comes to see Lord Krishna when he is already an reigning king in the Dwarka. And when he comes to see Lord Krishna, and then when he wants an audience to Lord Krishna, so then he was told to answer the question, which Brahma are you? And then once he confirms he's a four-headed Chaturmukha Brahma, and I come to talk something very important, and he's let in. But he's not able to resist his question on why he asked the question, which Brahma? So then Krishna summons all the Brahma, and this all happens parallelly in different worlds, where Lord Krishna is simultaneously there in different worlds, and Lord Brahma is Lord Brahma of each of that world. They all come to see Lord Krishna, and our Brahma was given an capability to be able to perceive that, where Brahma of different universes, they all come at the same time to see Lord Krishna. Unknown to them, unseen by them, Lord Brahma was able to see and was able to understand the greatness of Krishna, how the world is much beyond what he knew as what the world was. So that is a good example of how Lord Krishna is the connecting point. He is a sutra, sutre manigana eva. He is a connection between everything in every point within this world as well as in other worlds. So we see that. And also the Bhagavad Gita talks about the universal form, the Virata Roop, wherein all the world is seen in the same form of the Lord, all simultaneously working seamlessly. And Arjuna could see, and he could not understood or fathom the multitude or the magnificent of the great universal form. He just becomes completely overawed, and he wants to be not be able to see that anymore. He's done with it. So that is a good example of another place where we can understand how Krishna is the connecting point between this world, the next world, and all within this world. And he's there at every moment, at every place. All right. So then comes the explanation, because this is very important to understand. And the mystic potencies, or that is explained in the Yoga Shastra and the Srimad Bhagavatam, in the 11th canto, in the description of the discussion between Lord Krishna and Uddhava. Lord Krishna goes on to get next to explain the how in the Ashtanga Yoga process, at a certain stage of perfection, one is able to get different kinds of siddhis, mystic potencies. And these are the primary four siddhis. There are 8 of them in total. There are 4 primary and there are 4 secondary. And how these gives an uncommon and superhuman powers that will help in those who have it to do wonderful things. So this is not something. So the previous ages, this was very common for both demons and demigods. They were all able to have their own different powers to do different things, and they were very conveniently and very used to accomplish different things that is important to them. So first he explains the first 4 cities. One is becoming smaller than the smallest, another becoming greater than the greatest, another becoming lighter than the lightest, another being able to acquire anything that they can think in their mind. So, like acquire a different rupa form, acquire different things and control it. All these mystic potencies can possible by Prapti. And apart from the 8 siddhis, so he also explains, because this is very important to understand Vedic physics. These are the fundamental things to understand Vedic physics. If you want to understand how people are able to accomplish different things, that is superhuman, then you need to understand siddhis. And you also need to understand different categories of human beings also, how they are born inherently with different capabilities and siddhis. For example, demigods are already born with different capabilities. They don't have the body made up of earth component, so they have a subtle matter in abundance, which is making up their bodies. So they're able to permeate into the world of ours pretty easily, come in and go out at wish, at will. Though these are pretty common with demigods. Whereas yogis and rishis, they acquire these siddhis by doing penances in this mortal world. Demigods are born with it. And there are a lot of common conceptions that possibly the modern scientists can also understand. In their terms, he gives those terminologies and uses nomenclature that they're more familiar with, like the time dilation, wherein there is a different time scale, or the ticking is time is the periods are much different in different universal part of the universe. In the world we live in, it's different. it flows at a different rate, whereas the world above, it flows at a much higher, much lower rate. So like that, there's a time dilation. And there is also shape-changing abilities of the demigods. They can appear and disappear as normal human beings, and they can do uncommon things even in their after they morph their shape, taken a human form. They still have the retain their abilities. So that is also uh, introduced here. And then coming and going, appearance and disappearance is also something that is very important things to be understood, because they are they can be there at any moment, they may not be there also. So that is a possibility in the and the time can there could be a time when they are appeared, they are there for some time, and there will be a time they disappear as well. The disappearance doesn't necessarily mean they're gone. It is just they are disappeared from our sight, from our sense perception. The examples that so the Prabhu quotes is that of the Vrindavan, how this the Vrindavan of the material world is connected to the spiritual world, Golok Vrindavan. How Krishna's pastimes are always going on at all times. Every day there is Ashtakali, a Leela, so wherein Krishna does pastimes, specific pastimes with specific people at a specific place in Vrindavan. Although it's totally unseen by any mortal humans, but it can be perceived through spiritual vision if Krishna grants it. But whereas it's already happening as we speak. So that is the beauty of the how certain demigods or the supreme is the super most powerful entity who is the origin of all the cities, who is the origin of all this the human and superhuman cities. So that is also explained very nicely. And then very important thing that he highlights here is the qualification. So all this is not a material thing that can be acquired by due course of as a manipulation of matter. So this is to some extent this is coming in and out of the spirit. So this requires spiritual abilities or spiritual potencies to be able to perform some of these things. So because it is beyond the gross matter. So gross matter, the science that we know, is just manipulation of gross matter. Whereas the science in the Vedic theologies is involves subtle matter or it involves the spirit. So that is why it is much more um, superlative. So with that, he goes on to explain other concepts of how there's a yogic travel. So and we see that so we see that there's a possibility of a yogi. He can at any moment of time he can use his travel at the speed of mind. So he can go to a specific river in like Ganga, and he can immerse himself there, and he can come out of a different river like Kaveri, just completely they're not connected, and they're separated by thousands of miles. So that yogic travel is and something that is very seen in Srimad Bhagavatam pretty often. So you see the demigods coming in and out they are able to travel at the speed of mind. And we see from the Krishna book how Lord Brahma travels, comes from this world to our world. He does some things and goes back, and is able to take back boys from the Vrindavan back to the Brahmaloka, and he's able to keep them in kind of suspension, and is able to use all his mystic potencies. So we see many such lot of examples of that in Srimad Bhagavatam. Some of them are highlighted in this chapter, like Chitralekha is an example that is given. And Aniruddha was abducted by Chitralekha. That is the example that is given there. And a lot of examples like that is highlighted in this chapter. We will not go into all those details. So talking to So he's now coming to the point that how do we connect to these different things, the phenomenon that we see in the Puranas, especially the Bhagavad Purana, how to make sense of it from a modern viewpoint. And so that is very, one thing is he just makes a important concept of Kala Beda. The world is not a linearly flowing, time doesn't flow linearly. So there's a different yugas, which is inherently made up of different natural natural components. It comes with a specific certain combination of material things, wherein all the people who are living that yuga inherently they have the capability. Like the previous yugas, people used to live for a longer time, and in this yuga, Kali Yuga, they don't live. They live for at most 100 years or less. So this kind of variation in yuga, Kala Beda, is there. So that is giving rise to, since many of these different happenings is from previous yugas, and when we look at that from the Kali Yuga perspective, it looks like it's absurd, or it's something that can possibly not happen from a scientific viewpoint. But whereas we should understand this Kali Yuga comes within, we are by default disqualified from getting or acquiring certain potencies in order to demonstrate such abilities. So that is an important thing to understand. So that introduction is also given about the yugas. And then we come to this topic of how, because this book is about astronomy and cosmology, he he goes to explain a few important concepts like Navadvip. Navadvip is in a different part of the Indian subcontinent, and Vrindavan is a different part of the Indian subcontinent. But they are simultaneously they are connected in a spiritual point of view. And interestingly, that is Yamuna is also a tributary of Ganga, sense. So like that, there is a lot of different, and there is also explanation how there are different rivers that has they have been there in the past, but they're not there now. The river Saraswati, for example, it used to also flow from east to west, and so that is also an example that is cited. So all these are not perceivable by our senses in today's world, but it is there, but we cannot see it. And how the he explains goes on a great detail in explaining the Navadvip and Vrindavan, and also great personalities who are inhabiting the world we live in, unseen by us. Either they are not they are in a place where we are not able to go, or they could be maybe amongst us, but they're unseen by us. So he gives example of how the two royal princes who belong to Surya and Soma dynasty, they're still living in the Himalayas, but once the advent of Satyuga, they will come down and they will start the dynasties of the sun and the moon. So these examples are given, and there's a lot of different examples of Lord Hanuman being there in the Himalayas. And he's said to be an Chiranjeevi, or someone who has conquered death. So like that, those a lot of examples are given. So we need to accommodate these things to be able to understand Vedic physics. Although it's going to be a leap forward for modern science to understand or even be able to appreciate these things. So he's making a plea so that if you given possibility, understand certain basic concepts, then you should be able to see things a much better perspective. There is possibly an explanation for all these things, even from the modern standpoint of where science is. So that is I think I'm done. No, I'm not. Yeah, let's do this. So then he goes on to explain that this very important to understand how this multidimensional world, how it's connected, through the subtle matter. So the 3 dimension is limited to the gross view of world. Higher dimensions is possible um, through the subtle abilities, through the mind, intelligence, and ego. So using the different abilities, sensory powers that comes with the mind and the intelligence, one is able to transcend the gross limitations. One is able to go to the higher realms, which is all exist in the same continuum. So that is possible, and that needs to be further explored. And already there are a lot of interesting concepts of the although time travel has not been scientifically verified, but there is definitely some possible experiences of out of body experiences and things that goes on to say that there are higher sensory perceptions possible if one can transcend the gross matter and come to the sphere of subtle matter. Even within this modern science, with all the limitation that comes with the Kali Yuga, those things are still possible. There are people who are doing it also these days. A few people who are great yogis are able to do it even till today. So that's possible. And so that is his request to the scientific world that let's familiarize yourself with the Vedic theology and Vedic physics so that we're able to um, put our foot into the area that we cannot possibly ever achieve with the modern scientific capabilities. So that's his, he concludes by giving an example how the Brahma this Gaudiya Sampradaya and the Acharya of the Sampradaya, how he met Vyasadeva. So Vyasadeva is still there in this material world in the Bhatrika Ashrama, but that is not something that can be reached by a normal people. But Madhvacharya, even in this age of Kali Yuga, he he went and met Vyasadeva and he had instructions from him on spiritual matters, even in this age. So it is quite possible. The one needs to be open-minded and ready to follow the prescribed method to be able to achieve those higher realms, which will widen the scope of science, which will widen the perspective of science, if we incorporate spirit to it. So that I think is the concluding point in this chapter. So I'll stop here and open for any questions, comments from devotees.
Thank you, Ms. Shringadev. We'll open it up to questions. So you can raise a hand, or can you bring the camera up so we can see your face a little bit? Great, thank you. We'll open it up to questions, comments. You can type them in the chat or just raise a hand. It's really interesting that about these cities that they are a part of our culture, but they're relegated to fiction. So that it's in all the fantasy movies and all the science fiction. So we do know it and we do like it, but it doesn't have a place anywhere outside of that. And I find that really interesting. It's a bit ironic. And also with technology, the more we're outsourcing our senses per se, we're getting more and more away from these subtleties than closer to them, and that's also ironic. Okay, so any questions, any comments? Oh, we have Krishna here.
Okay. Hare Krishna. In that slide where they had the 4 examples of the 4 cities, and the Prompti city really caught my eye because I've always thought of Prompti city, and Prabhupada describes it this way: is you can, somehow bring something from far away to where you are. But interestingly, Sariputta apparently described it this way: is that you can become the proprietor of the senses of all living entities. So I couldn't, in my mind, I'm not able to relate those 2 things. Is maybe you or if someone else who's watching can figure out how being able to get something from far away and bring it to where you are is similar or the same as becoming the proprietor of the senses of all living entities. Does anyone have any thoughts on that? Nishringa?
Yeah.
SDG?
Paul, in case, I mean, I could speak, unless Narasimha wants to say something about that.
Go ahead, Maharaj.
I think it's always good to start with the literal meanings of words, because whatever else, wherever it ends up, it has to get there from the literal meaning of the words. So the word Prompti in Sanskrit means, in Monier Williams, reach, range, extent, the power of obtaining everything, one of the 8 superhuman faculties, the yoga siddhis. Attaining, obtaining, meeting with, finding, acquisition, gain. So the word literally means obtaining everything. And that's traditionally how it's been understood. So Sariputa's definition is interesting, and it's not like necessarily wrong, but there has to be a logical trail that goes from what the word actually means literally and the way it's always been understood and what he's saying. I mean, there has to be a road that gets there. We can't just say, well, that's just what it means. It doesn't really mean what the dictionary says, and it doesn't really mean what everyone traditionally thought of it. So if you think about it, could you repeat again what Sariputta defines it?
Yeah, he
Let me
said,
put that on the.
yeah,
Let
put
me
on
put that on
screen.
the.
Becomes the proprietor of the senses of all living entities.
Well, okay, this is how
Right, let's see. Yeah.
Okay, so that's okay. I got that. So I would say that could you take that the screen sharing off just a second, so I could, it just makes it easier to talk to everybody. Yeah, thank you. So there is a possible logical connection. Let's say, for example, to give Prabhupada's, let's say you reach out to some place, I don't know, in North India and pick, let's say you're in Chicago and you reach out and pick up a pomegranate in, North India or something. So what's really going on? I mean, if Sariputa's definition, the only way I can see that his definition is compatible is that it's not that your hand actually extends thousands of miles through space, but somehow or other you're able to use the senses of others, or somehow or other, if someone who's actually there, by the tree reaches up and picks it and picks off that fruit, somehow you can use their senses, their active senses, to get what you want.
Oh,
It
makes sense, because you're not, like you said, you're not extending your own body out to get the thing. You're actually manipulating or enjoying or using the thing through somebody else's body.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously, that Prompti doesn't mean at any given moment you're controlling, let's say, on Earth today, you're controlling all the senses of, say, 8 billion people. It means that if you have some specific, object that you want to acquire, then you work through the sense of other people. Of course, does that mean that, but there's so much to explain. Does that mean that, let's say you want that pomegranate, so someone standing by the pomegranate tree, somehow you induce them to reach up and get it? Or is it that your desire connects with someone who's already picking up a pomegranate? Does that person experience the pomegranate suddenly vanishing from their hand?
Good question.
And so it's, yeah, I'm not rejecting the definition that Sariputta gave, but there's a lot left to explain. Whereas, the simple idea, which is the traditional one and the dictionary one, is just that Prompti literally means acquire, to acquire, to obtain. And it just means somehow you can acquire things, obtain things. It's kind of like the ultimate in shopping, right? You can, like planetary shopping, you can. So yeah, so I think I would not emphasize or try to argue for Sariputa's definition without more information, but there are logical ways you could try to explain it.
Thank you very much.
Okay, we have a hand raised. Pancharatna Prabhu, go ahead.
Yeah, just adding to that, by the way, because I was just looking at he's quoting the Srimad Bhagavatam verse, and this is probably a realm of exploration how that all works, because it's very subtle. But
Yeah,
my question is more to the topic of Vedic physics. I'm trying to understand a bit about how we get from what you've described here to the concept of physics as a science. I have my own ideas and perceptions, but I'd like to hear from you how you feel all these dots get connected into a concept of physics from a Vedic perspective.
yeah, it's as I mentioned as well in the.
I'm sorry, forgive me for interrupting, but I would just like to refer to that verse, because before we move on to another topic, could we just talk a little bit about that verse you posted in the chat?
I didn't post it. I think somebody else put something in the chat.
Pancharat, you posted it?
No, I didn't post it. I just looked it up.
Oh,
if you want to
yeah,
see it,
if I could just say a word about that, I mean, it's really, there's really an iron rule in terms of trying to, scholarship of the Bhagavatams. You can't base your points on the English translation. And so, which is often non-literal. So especially in an academic setting, you have to talk about the Sanskrit, not the English translation. So if you look at the Sanskrit, the dharayan mayahang tatve mano vikarike, what it says is sarvendriyanam atmatvam, Prompti prapnoti manmana. So if you look at the last two lines, sarvendriyanam atmatvam, it's in the chat. That simply means, well, the last line says Prompti prapnoti. It's kind of a play on words. One acquires, acquiring, or one attains, attaining. Manmana, by having the mind in me. It doesn't say that one becomes a lord of the sense of everyone. It just says sarvendriyanam atmatvam. So of all the senses, one achieves atmatvam, sort of like self-identification with all the senses. It doesn't literally say the senses of all living entities. It doesn't say to become the proprietor of them. It just says that one achieves atmatvam, which is sort of self-identification of all the senses, and thereby one achieves Prompti. So if you look at the Sanskrit, it's not. I think it's more. I think what the Sanskrit is literally saying is not that one becomes the proprietor of all the senses of other people, but somehow it could be it becomes the proprietor of one's own senses. Because sarvendriyanam can just mean of all one's own senses. And atmatvam, if I could just tell you very briefly, and I don't want to go on and on with this, but because I know other people have things to say, but if I could just tell you what the literal meaning of atmatvam is. Atmatvam means essence or nature, like having as one's own self. So one becomes, or it can just mean selfhood, literally selfhood. So I don't think the Sanskrit really clears this up. Pancharatna, do you want to reply?
I'm lost. I don't know. I'm not a Sanskritist, but certainly it's one of those realms that is sort of, I should say, the entryway into this mystic world through the Sanskrit language, because it's so requires more than just a scholar's understanding.
It does, but there's a really serious danger in not being scholarly, and the obvious danger is that then, let's say, an impersonalist or the Ramakrishna mission, they can say the Bhagavad Gita really means this. And you could say, well, that's not literally what it says. And then they could say, yeah, but the spiritual goes beyond the literal. And so, you know, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and we can't really play it both ways. So if we want to authorize non-literal translations, we're going down a very dangerous road. And we're really losing our power to justify our explanation of the Bhagavad Gita.
Right.
Well, you were part of the team that did the translation of these cantos, so I leave it to
No, I know. I did it when I was very young, and I can plead insanity on the grounds of youth. But I think this is really, I mean, I don't want to go on too long for this, but I think it's really important to understand, because this is a BI event. And it, you know, we're trying to do scholarship for Prabhupada as a service to Prabhupada. And although I know it's, you know, not, obviously most people don't want to go through all the torture of learning Sanskrit, but it is a fact that we cannot discuss our philosophy. We cannot discuss all these, let's say, the Bhagavatam in academic circles unless we have a reasonable understanding of what the text is actually saying. Otherwise, it would have to be, as Tamal Krishna pointed out, you know, in his thesis at Cambridge, it would have to be a discussion of Prabhupada's interpretation of the Bhagavatam, which of course one could argue is authorized and authentic and everything. But, you know, I mean, there are rules in academia, and if we give ourselves a pass that we don't have to follow those rules, then everybody else can do the same thing. And we lose our power to establish the Bhagavad Gita as it is, or the Bhagavatam as it is. I'll stop there.
Thank you. We have a question or a comment by Christina.
Pancharatna didn't finish his question. Sridhana interrupted him.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yes, so I think, Narasimhadeva, did you want to reply to that question?
Yeah, I believe the question that Pancharatna Prabhu had was, how do we get entry into the higher sensory prowess or perception?
no, that was not my question. My question, because I'm not a physicist, but I do, you know, I went to a high school class on physics. so I remember hearing about energy and laws of nature, et cetera, you know, mechanical laws of Newtonian. And of course, now we have the physics of the subatomic particles. And basically, it's all dealing with the physics of physics of physical world. And I'm just, you know, I came to my own conclusion in hearing your presentation, was that Sadaputra Prabhu is pointing out how the Vedas point in a certain direction. They give evidence and the term came up several times of dimensional, higher dimensional, of other dimensions. And I believe that is also a realm of physics. When you start talking about the dimensions of reality, that's the arena, the field that is studied in physics. And am I correct in that? That's kind of what I concluded, but I wanted to hear more your take on that.
Yeah, so I would see that all those different things that is concerning the multidimensional world and what you can achieve through that is something that got to do with subtle matter. So with just the physics that we know today, with concerning just the gross things that can be touched, that can be felt, that can be smelt. So I don't think that has the necessary tools to dwell into that arena, that paradigm. To enter into that paradigm, I think we need to use subtle sensory perception and the tools like yoga and meditation, and being able to use the siddhis to be able to enter into the multidimensional paradigm.
Okay.
Hey, yeah, thank you very much for the presentation. I really like this chapter in the book, so it's very nice. The discussion of Prompti was very interesting to me. I agree with Hridayananda Goswami, and actually the Sariputta translation and the way Hridayananda Goswami described it is very intuitive to me because it just feels a lot like networking technology. So I mean, if I wanted to ask Hridayananda, so way back in the 1500s or whatever, if I wanted to ask someone on the other side of the world a question and get their direct answer, then I would have to do a lot of things. I would have to first I would have to, let's say, know how to read and write, and then I would have to write a letter, and then I would have to get it there somewhere through some merchant ship and various messengers. I would have to know exactly where they are, and then they would have to be able to read and write and be able to read what I'm writing and do this whole thing. But now we have Zoom. And so if you think about what Zoom is, right? I have this intention. I want to ask Hridayananda Goswami a question. I want to hear his answer. And that intention is being carried out not by my own direct senses, but it goes through the series of tubes, right? All this matter has to align in a certain way. And then it uses Hridayananda Goswami's computer, right? That's not my computer. That's not my webcam. But it uses those senses that belong in some way to him, and then it allows him to hear what I'm saying, and then he responds back, and then I basically use his technology to get what I want, which is his response. So yeah, if you think about it that way, if you think about it like, okay, way back in the day, you couldn't get a fruit from across the world and have it order it and then get it in time to actually eat it because it was right. You just couldn't do it. But now you can just order something on Amazon. And so yeah, if you think about Amazon as this kind of taking your intention and this alignment of matter and other people's senses to get something and then bring it to you almost instantaneously, basically. It's basically the yogic city of Prompti. So that's how I see it.
True, to some extent, it mimics the yogic siddhi of Prompti, but it has its own limitations. Coming from based upon the science that we know today, it has its own frailties, its own limitations. So it all depends on the electricity. Once electricity is you're disconnected from the power grid, then it cannot do any of these things. So it has its own limitations. Whereas the yogic siddhis, it gives you much reach beyond the being connected to the grid.
That's absolutely true. I'm just saying this is a way of understanding what Sariputta said in the book.
Right. Thanks.
If I could just comment on that, on what you two just were discussing, and then I know Ranjit has his lotus hand up. So, and that is that, I mean, clearly it's, we're in a difficult position because we're trying to explain something that no one can observe. And yet it's not spiritual. I mean, in fact, that's why the yoga siddhis like Prompti are discouraged in Vaishnava literature because they are material, they're not spiritual. And so we're saying basically that in Dwapara Yuga, perhaps, or previous ages, people had this higher technology, this higher science, although the techniques have been lost now, and so it can't be demonstrated. And so it seems to me that requires us to present these things in a very appropriate way, not proudly like saying, oh, this modern technology is nothing compared to Prompti city or other cities, because we can't duplicate it now. We can't demonstrate it now. And so, I mean, almost everyone is going to go with a demonstrable technology, even if theoretically it's inferior, as opposed to an undemonstrable technology, which is superior, but no one can do it now. And so I don't mean to conclude from this that we should not talk about it, or that we can't talk about it, but I think we have to really find an appropriate language, an appropriate way, an appropriate attitude, so that we do defend the idea that such things existed, but that we do so in a way which doesn't subject us to ridicule in a scholarly community. And just last thing, I don't want to take too much time, but I mean, I do that myself. In the introduction I wrote to what I call Great Bharata, my presentation on Mahabharata, and also another sort of an academic introduction, in which I give the example, imagine the world we know it is blown up, and or there's some kind of, you know, catastrophic event, nuclear war, another asteroid hitting the earth like the one that wiped out the dinosaurs or whatever. And so life as we know it is gone, human beings survive, but the technology is all lost. And then and it's not revived, because human civilization went on for thousands of years without the technology we have now. It's saying the gap between the loss of Dwapara Yuga and Treta and Satya Yuga technology and the rise of modern technology, the sort of a dark ages of technology. And so imagine that in the future, when there's not another scientific revolution, there's not an industrial revolution, and life goes on for thousands of years, pretty much in the same way. And then let's say they discover some old books, they excavate some books that talk about our technology, like you point and click and, you know, maybe a mountain blows up, or, you know, all these things, like amazing things happen just by pointing and clicking, and they happen instantaneously, global communication, and it strikes them as mythology because they have no analogs. There are no analogs or no analogies. And so for them, it's just technology. I'm sorry, it's just mythology. And so that's something like what has actually happened, because the science really is lost. It's funny because Krishna says in the Gita, I'm speaking to you, Arjuna, because the spiritual science was lost. So Krishna is restoring the theology, but he's not restoring the technology. And so in that sense, I think we have to, as scholars, we have to develop an appropriate language to, in a sense, defend the notion that there was a higher yuga, but not present it in a way that subjects us to ridicule in
I totally agree.
environments.
Yeah, this being, I mean, yeah, we have a bunch of devotees here, so it's kind of thought of.
No, it's
my
fine.
point.
Yeah. And absolutely, that wasn't a criticism. I mean, obviously among devotees, we can talk about that. But since the reason we're having these programs is kind of so we can be trained and educated, like how do we go out in the world and take this out into the Sankirtan movement? So it's fine to talk about it, but I think we have to really think about how we present it.
True.
If I might present something. The idea of dimensions is not unknown. And in fact, Stephen Weinberg, the physicist, he had a whole presentation of string theory and so on that had the concept of dimensions, that there were that somehow there were multiple dimensions involved in reality. And he derives this from practically, you could say, metaphysical equations plus some what do you call it, experimentation. And so the idea of having different dimensions is not unusual, and it's just a question of can the VI present something that has some material equivalent? Is there some kind of equivalency that we can present in that way? That was just my feeling on it.
Just if I could just respond briefly, because I think you hit upon a really important point. And that is that, take string theory, for example. I mean, there's all kinds of things like string theory that can't be proved. And yet, because they have explanatory power, they kind of, so in empirical science, they cheat like crazy. In the sense that for them, they're very generous with themselves, and a theory can become very popular and like almost a scientific consensus simply because of explanatory power without proof. But if we present something on the spiritual side, which has tremendous explanatory power, suddenly they become super rigorous empiricists. Like, where's the evidence? So, generous with themselves and super rigorous with metaphysicists. So I think we could claim, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Don't move the goalpost. And and if they're going to accept, let's say some of them, not all of them, of course, but many of them accept string theory just because of explanatory power, well, our teachings also have explanatory power.
Yeah, there is, logic is there, and logic is one of the most important aspects of proof. Thank you.
Very nice point, Rajit Prabhu made. Yeah, there is definitely underlying logic which seems to connect with the other paradigm, that the Vedic paradigm. It's definitely explainable. So as Maharaj was pointing out, you need to use the right language, use the right attitude and explanatory power to be able to put things across to them and have them buy it. Many things in that way is just running on rhetoric and explanatory power. Politics to science.
Okay, thank you. We also have a question or comment by Dr. Hugo here. Go ahead.
So based on that previous point from Hirdayananda Maharaj as well, kind of the explanatory power of different theories, whether they be scientific or spiritual, the thing that I end up thinking of is something that we read in our Bhakti Shastras a lot, and Prabhupada's writing, etc. That devotional service has both direct and indirect aspects. That the direct aspect is doing things favorable for bhakti. The indirect aspect is not doing things unfavorable for bhakti. So both positive activities to cultivate bhakti and getting rid of negative activities. So a similar idea seems to apply here, that as part of these educational series, part of it is getting a better understanding of what's the full depth of the spiritual concepts and ideas that we can bring to the temple or to the table. That's kind of the direct aspect. But then the indirect aspect is also learning about the history of science and the philosophy of science, kind of like you're mentioning, Maharaj, with string theory. Oftentimes, the way science is presented in society today, you read something in a textbook, there's no story of the discussion behind it, the history behind it, the politics behind it, just presented as an idea. A student learns it and says, oh, okay, this is just a fundamental fact of reality. So part of the education seems to be also thinking more critically and understanding that how scientific theories can have holes, how can they be manipulated, all these kinds of things. So that kind of seems to bring another side of our education, not only learning about how to explain ourselves, but also how do we more deeply understand what's being explained out in the academic circles.
Yeah, and the science is extremely politicized. I personally believe that string theory, one of the main motivations to rush it into general acceptance, even though you can't prove it, is because it's an attempt to defeat Siddhartha's argument, the mathematical argument in mechanistic and non-mechanistic, that it's the probability of the natural world as we observe it arising by itself it's absurdly improbable. I mean, it's absurdly improbable. And so they think that, well, if there's millions of universes, it changes the odds. And so there's a lot of pushback against string theory now. And so what you said reminds me that the world of science is extremely politicized for two reasons. One reason is that there's billions of dollars out there. And, like, will fake results for money. So, 50%, actually a congressional study showed that 50% of all the papers on science actually had serious logical errors and didn't really prove it, or couldn't be reproduced. The experiments couldn't be reproduced. So there's a huge amount of money, status involved. Secondly, they're really fighting for the grand narrative, because historically every society has a great narrative for, for many, many centuries. In the West, it was the Bible. Like, where did the world come from? Read Genesis. And so when you control the dominant narrative, which governs a society, in a sense, you control the values and purposes of that society. And so there was kind of a, revolution against the biblical worldview or against the metaphysical view of reality. And so really what they're fighting for is to keep control of the grand narrative. And it's collapsing. I mean, they're losing that battle because physicalism is just so philosophically idiotic for various reasons. So they're actually losing that battle. But for those two motives, yes, they're anything but objective. And that's what Thomas Kuhn pointed out, the structure of scientific revolutions. It's not this sublime, serene progress of thought, discarding, disprove views. It's all political. It's all about people becoming attached to positions and power and being attached to their reputation. And basically a generation dies off, a new generation comes in. So it's been proved academically, the huge subjective element in the history of science, and the times favor us. The time factor is favoring us now for various reasons I won't go into, but so yeah, you're right, and so this is a great time for us.
Yes, okay. BT, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, one issue that comes up with string theory, and by the way, one of the major proponents is Brian Greene. One of the problems that comes up is one of these theories that's not falsifiable. Well, according to Kuhn, that creates a problem. Doesn't make it
A Popper, yeah,
theory.
Popper, yeah, Popper.
Yeah, Popper, I mean, 'cause it's just absolutely not falsifiable. At least the multiverse component of it. Though, curiously, the idea of multi-dimensions kind of reminds me of the story of all the Brahmas appearing when our Brahma visited Narayan, and all these Brahmas came with millions of heads. That just begs for on some kind of dimensionality beyond what we can see.
Yeah, and also a lot of the things about, for example, like when let's say 1 year passes on the higher planets, it's so many more years here. So multidimensionality is all over the place in Bhagavatam.
Yeah, and actually the idea you're mentioning of time dilation, it's actually been materially proven to exist. And if an astronaut has a watch on, a very precise watch, and we have identical one on Earth, when he comes back, they're not identical anymore.
Yeah.
Krishna, go ahead.
I just want to put in real quick a little plug for science. I think everything Kriyananda said has a lot of value. There's a lot of political stuff going on in science, but there's a lot of actually very good work. And Prabhupada actually mentions that quite a bit if you look at all of his quotes about science. He actually
Absolutely.
says, yeah, and I just feel the need to make, end this thing with a
No,
little.
thank you. You're right.
Yeah.
Real science is wonderful. Real science is a manifestation of Krishna.
Yes. Prabhupada actually said the scientists and the devotees are engaged in the same business, trying to understand the nature of reality. And so we do wind up with these beautiful, as Christina pointed out, this beautiful mystic city here, these computers where we can connect with people all over the world. So science has, in its more pristine aspect, is actually a friend of the devotee. So I just wanted to.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, Prabhupada saw it that way.
Yes.
Nice. Okay, we have 5 minutes left. Are there any more comments or questions?
Oh, let me just say something. In 5 minutes from now, there's another program for those who aren't aware. This is the 52 anniversary of when Prabhupada came to visit Gainesville, July 29th, 1971. And he was on the campus and spoke, and that was the inspiration for Krishna Lunch, which has gone on since. And it, in many ways, was a most special visit. And we're going to have 3 speakers telling us some of the adventures that occurred at that time. It'll be Hridayananda Maharaj, Ananga Manjari, and Amarendra. And Amarendra is here right now. We expect Ananga Manjari soon. And so that program will begin in 4 minutes. It'll be the same Zoom channel. All of you are invited to stay on and have a wonderful adventure hearing about how all of this began and still goes on.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Krishna, I have to take leave.
Oh, would you like something to drink or a little snack before you go?
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Are you gonna?
See you next time.
Hugo,
We look forward.
one more comment.
I also want to go back to what Hridayananda Maharaj said early on regarding getting into the actual Sanskrit of the verses and actually understanding what are the texts themselves saying. I was appreciating this point that if we're using Prabhupada's translations and purports in explaining these things, we're not talking about the Bhagavatam or the Bhagavad Gita, we're talking about Srila Prabhupada's presentation of the Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, which in devotee circles, that difference really doesn't really matter because there's an implicit faith in Srila Prabhupada, understanding him as the Acharya, as a bona fide representative of our spiritual tradition. But how in academic circles, I mean, who is Prabhupada? He's just one amongst hundreds of translators of these spiritual texts. And so I was appreciating this subtle distinction and how when it comes to presenting Krishna consciousness concepts from the Vedas in a broader audience, especially an intellectual academic audience, to be able to really prove what we're talking about in a very explicit and definite way in our text through the actual language of the text. I was appreciating kind of reaffirming the importance of that.
Thank you. And also last thing, my thanks to Krishna Kirtan, Venkatesh Abhinanda. Unfortunately, I didn't get around to replying to you, but thank you for your comments, which I'm reading and appreciating. So I guess we have to move on to the next program, right?
Yes, we're moving on to the next program. So thank you all very much. You're welcome to stay on. Please do stay on.
Hey, Pancha.
Join us in 2 weeks for our next presentation. That's going to be Chapter 3 of Vedic Cosmography and Astronomy. The name of the chapter is Vedic Cosmography. That's going to be presented by Prishni Sutton. She has a BA in mathematics, and she currently serves as the secretary and treasurer for both the VIHS and the Richard L. Thompson archives. And a very big thank you to Narasimhadeva for presenting today. Thank you very much.
Very much.
Yes, thank you, Narasimha.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. Sadhu